Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming into this event, and thank you for anyone that's tuning in from home. My name is Chun. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Compliance at Emagine IT. I'm also the 3PA practice lead as well.
I'm Erik Dominguez, the Senior Manager over the Penetration Testing Team for the 3PA practice.
And I'm Allie, DiPietro, Consumer Services Specialist at Aquia. Thanks for coming, everybody. That's a disclaimer, if anyone wants a moment to read over that. I'm sure you'll see it plenty of times today. So for a quick agenda, for folks who joined this room, this is the post-ATO ConMon conversation. So if you're interested in the other conversation about what happens before you go through the ATO process, that's with our friends in the other room. But for today, we'll talk a little bit about what that process looks like, some changes due to the Rev 5 that's come up recently, and how you can best prepare for that ConMon process once you are ready to start moving forward with it.
Awesome. I'll take it over from here. So just to spur a little bit of participation, hopefully for the Q&A session later on, just a show of hands here. Who's in the FedRAMP process right now, looking to get into the FedRAMP process, learning more about it before you get an ATO? Okay. One. That's good. How about anyone here that's post-ATO? You've already gotten your assessment done and you've got an authorized system. Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully you can take away some good information from here. We're, like Allison said, we're going to be going through some of the continuous monitoring requirements as well as the revision 5, and we'll get to learn a little bit more about red team and penetration testing. So diving right into the first slide here, this is from the ConMon perspective. So your organization just went through the gauntlet of understanding the NIST controls, security controls. You've applied those security controls to your system and your architecture. You've re-architected your environment. You've gone through one of the most rigorous risk management assessments in the world, right? And you came out of that with a momentous achievement, which not many organizations or CSPs can actually say that they've achieved, and that's FedRAMP authorization. So you may be thinking that because you've gone through the assessment, you have your ATO, that everything's done now, right? And everything is easier. Well, not quite that simple, but the good thing is that your team now has that understanding of what the FedRAMP process is. And so you understand all that it takes to maintain that type of system. So diving right into some of the basics here, since you've established a relationship with an authorizing official, whether that's the JAB or a federal agency, now it's your time to make sure that you apply some of the activities that you attested to during your assessment and for your FedRAMP system to make sure that you maintain continuous monitoring. So things like monthly ConMon meetings or continuous monitoring, that needs to happen with your authorizing official. And there are a few things that need to be produced out of that, right? So that your authorizing official can understand the types of risks that are present within your environment, some of the changes that are happening with your system, and just helping them to gain a better understanding of what they need to risk accept or review and approve. So going into the plan of action and milestones, the plan of action milestones, POAMs, are it's a spreadsheet, right, report that is presented to your authorizing official. It details a lot of information about any risks that are identified within your environment through vulnerability scans or continuous monitoring activities. The POAM is going to be an item that needs to be uploaded into the FedRAMP file repository. So what's important about that is that it needs to match your vulnerability scans, and because those have to be uploaded as well. So the POAMs are going to be an important aspect of your monthly ConMon meetings. The meetings aren't your only opportunity, but it's a good opportunity to make sure that your agency sponsor, the JAB, understands any of the deviations that are present within your environment. So if you need to create a deviation form for any false positives or vendor dependencies, any operational requirements that may exist, that's a good time for you to provide that form, talk about it with your authorizing official, and then get it approved. Of course, with the continuous monitoring, the monthly requirement here is also to upload an updated inventory workbook, and that's to make sure that it is accurate and accurately reflects the state of your system and its components. So now that you have a little bit of understanding of that side of things, let's get into some of the ConMon requirements, or a little bit more of them. So if you've been through the FedRAMP process now, you probably know that a continuous monitoring plan is a FedRAMP requirement. But the good thing is that FedRAMP does provide us with guides and templates in order for us to develop an adequate and detailed plan. Some of the requirements there are on the screen. I'll skip over a few of the bullets here, but some of the more touching or important requirements here are the contingency plan and the incident response plan. Those need to be tested on an annual basis. And what's really important here is that for systems that are moderate and above, you need to have a fully functional exercise that tests it out. We do recommend that you pair them up, so have your contingency plan initiate based off of an incident that happens, and that way you can knock them out in one swing. Of course, the updating of your system security plan, your SSP, as well as the associated documentation, that needs to be done and updated on an annual basis. And then completing your annual assessment, as well as penetration testing and red team activity. So let's move on to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more about annual assessment requirements as well as significant changes. So for FedRAMP, they require that all CSPs go through an annual assessment. So every year you need to perform an annual assessment that takes into account a certain level of controls, right? So this doesn't mean that you have to perform an assessment on all the controls in your baseline that you may have done during your initial assessment. This is your chance to do a third of the controls annually. So the first year, a third, second year, a third, third year, a third, until you've reached that full set of controls. Some of the caveats, though, to that is that there are core controls that are defined by FedRAMP. Core controls require you to do them every time, so annually. FedRAMP has defined these as required because they are deemed to be a little bit more critical in nature. There are other controls that are impacted, so any controls impacted by POEMs, plan of action or milestones, any controls that are impacted by significant changes, they need to be included within that selection. And once you have that set, you can choose your own based on that 1/3 to make it that total. So moving into some of the significant changes. Significant changes can be included in off-cycle or our annual assessments, the latter being a little bit more economical because you can include that in your selection of that 1/3 set. But the significant changes, there's a guide available that allows you to understand what signifies or designates as a significant change. And for example, patches and everyday maintenance, those things don't designate as a significant change, so you can kind of do those as necessary. Let's see, diving into the revision 4, revision 5 updates. I know that this is a big topic right now, and of course, if I had all the time in the world, I'd get into the nitty-gritties, but we'll give you a little bit of a high-level review here right now. So if you do have an ATO already, this year's annual assessment is going to be a little bit different. So last December did mark the end of the FedRAMP PMO's acceptance of any initial assessments or annual assessments that are based on the Rev 4 baseline. So that means that 2024 is going to be the year of the Rev 5 transition. Now, there are going to be some requirements here that are a little bit different in your control selection. And to name a few here, the conditional controls. The conditional controls are going to need to be validated through PAO, and those are basically controls that have made it through the transition. So from Rev 4 to Rev 5, they are still present in the Rev 5 baseline. However, they do have some wording, material, parameter changes that you need to validate to make sure that if you've tested it before and you've tested that it's fully compliant, it doesn't have to make it onto your control selection, but if you haven't, then it needs to make it onto the assessment for this year. The CSP specific controls, those ones selected by the CSP, can be done just as such. So those are up to your choosing. Inherited control is a little bit different. There's a tab in that control selection worksheet that requires you to ensure that you check with your vendors, your external vendors, to see if their transition to Rev 5 has impacted any controls that are inherited now. And finally, the core controls. The core controls have added all of the Rev 5, the new Rev 5 controls, and that set is totaled to 130 now. So some more important updates to the Rev 5 transition are the inclusion and integration of the privacy requirements. We have the supply chain risk management family, or the SR family, that's a new family that's included, as well as CM6 configuration management. There's a requirement for you to perform configuration hardening for your system. And previously in the Rev 4 version, you were allowed to use CIS level 1 benchmarks. Now you have to use STIGs or DoD security technical implementation guides as a first step. Now, FedRAMP does understand that that STIGs do break certain tooling, that they're not always available, that they're not always up to date, but it's the first step, and if it doesn't apply or it doesn't allow your system to function in the way that it needs to, then you can move down to CIS level 2 benchmarks. And finally, everyone's hot topic for the day, for the year, is going to be penetration testing updates as well as red team exercises. And to take that on, I'm going to hand it over to Erik Dominguez.
Thanks, Adam. So yeah, once again, Erik Dominguez, Senior Manager over the Penetration Testing Team for Emagine IT. And just to kind of expand a little bit on what Adam was talking about for pen testing, wanted to dive into the difference between, the FedRAMP penetration test actually has mandatory attack vectors and everything. And also make sure that everyone understands that it is a penetration test, not a glorified vulnerability scan. A lot of companies are very surprised when they find out that we actually are going to send exploits over the wire and things of that nature. Yes, it is actual true penetration test, simulation of what the bad guys will be doing. There are contingencies in place to ensure that we're not going to break anything, but far and wide it is using the same tooling that the bad guys will be using. And so with that being said, there are the mandatory attack vectors that FedRAMP mandates are the first one being external to corporate, which is social engineering. All right. Now, with the social engineering campaigns, they do mandate a few things that happen that kind of really take a lot of customers by surprise. One of them being that they have to allow list the emails to get through. They want to make sure that we are testing the employee, not the security that protects the employee. Reason for that is someone gets phished at another company and that one's going to make it through. You don't have those protections in place. You want to make sure that your employees can actually identify the actual phish before it comes in and compromises everything. There's a couple of more smaller ones in that that are mandated, such as making sure that payloads can be caught and stuff like that. So when we do those, we want to make sure that your protections are working. So we're not just ignoring the protections. We just have to make sure that the social engineering campaign gets to test the employee. Next one would be external to CSP target system. So that's, in essence, the second and third one are kind of the meat and potatoes of the penetration testing portion of it, because during that is when we're actually testing the application, the servers, the firewalls, all of those types of protections that are in place. Now we do actually do some vulnerability scanning. The difference between our vulnerability scans and what the customer does is that customer vulnerability scans are authenticated. I call ours surface scans because they're unauthenticated. It is simulation of a bad guy actually getting inside the environment and seeing like if there are any low-hanging fruit, for instance. Tenant to CSP management is the very same. That is going to simulate an attacker coming in and stealing one of your customers' data, like their passwords and stuff like that. So we want to see if if a customer is phished for those credentials, can the bad guy actually use that to get inside of your system and start stealing everyone else's? Next one is tenant to tenant. Now that is essentially customer to customer is a good way to think about that. We want to make sure that, if you have administrative rights for your for that company, just for your system, think of it as if you are logging into something, you're going to have users and then you're going to have admin rights, but it's just for your account. We want to make sure that admin to your account doesn't necessarily mean admin to everyone else's account. That's the gist of that. Mobile application to target system, that's kind of self-explanatory. What we'll be doing is seeing if there's a mobile app on the App Store, Android, etc. We'll decompile it, make sure that everything is inside of it, good to go. Client-side applications are the same as if you have an executable that gets put into an environment, we're going to test that executable to see if anything can be extrapolated from it to make it to get into the other systems on the back end. Now, one of the things that we do need to touch on is that these can overlap. For instance, there was a situation a couple of years ago where I was doing a pen test, and on the client side, the mobile app ended up having SQL injection, which caused the tenant environment to have backend access and administrative backend access to the actual client systems, which goes back up to attack vector 2. So they can overlap. We do have to do all of that testing. So just bear that in mind, that it is good to ensure that all of your systems are covered. You don't want to narrow your scope too far because it can result in findings that we should have found to begin with, and other attack vectors. Now, moving on to the new stuff, which is the hot topic right now, and that's going to be red teaming. And yes, there is a good bit of overlap between red team and penetration testing. The main difference, in my opinion, is that during the penetration testing phase, just like what I discussed about the allow listing for the social engineering campaigns and stuff like that, when we are doing the testing, we ask that, we'll test the defenses, but then we want to ensure that any bad guys that gets past the defenses, bad guys have the luxury of unlimited time to throttle back on their scans. We don't have that luxury. So we'll test the defenses and then ask that you allow list us, and that way we go through and to make sure that we can test everything to its full potential. During a red team exercise, we're not allow listed, but we are simulating getting past that first layer of defense. So we want to test to make sure that antiviruses are picking up payloads. That can we bypass that? Are we able to get in and do some simulations to where we're deleting logs and things like that? And it all ties back into ConMon, which is what Adam was talking about. So you see that the overlap there is very strong in that regard. The testing framework that the FedRAMP has stated is one to be accepted as the Mitre ATT&CK Framework. Mitre ATT&CK is highly regarded for all of the federal systems. It covers everything. We actually did send in some information to the PMO because they are saying right now it is best effort. So we sent our methodology in of how we're mapping the Mitre ATT&CK Framework to the mandatory attack vectors. PMO did approve that, so there is a lot of mapping that can go on, and then for mobile applications as well, there's a separate Mitre ATT&CK Framework, and they did approve us to use that as well. So there is a good bit of overlap in that, and the main thing that you'll have to really consider when doing the red team exercise is that you'll need to provide your 3PAO with internal access to do the red team. Now, you can have a separate red team exercise as long as it covers all of those attack vectors. I do know that. The PMO did state that that is acceptable. However, the people that perform that red team exercise have to be licensed to do FedRAMP type work. I think that covers everything. Yep.
Perfect. Excuse me. All right. Thanks, Eric. So what does this mean from a management standpoint and how we actually execute, FedRAMP post ATO? Well, one thing I really like is when you go on the FedRAMP site, they give you this graphic here. And you can see way down at the end here is ConMon, and they make it look like this nice little thing at the end, like, oh, hey, don't forget to do ConMon. But the reality about ConMon is this is actually the new way of life for your organization. This is not a one-time thing. If you're pursuing FedRAMP, you are doing this forever, and this is going to become part of how your business is organized. And the reason that that's not just so important for the sake of having FedRAMP, any CISSPs, CISMs in here? Yeah, okay. So it's not just about personal security, because that's the big one they always talk about, but making the CEO happy. Like, if you read between the lines, that's what you're supposed to do. What can we do to have good data to operate our business, and how can we integrate security and compliance into the goals of the organization overall? Well, ConMon helps you by early detection. So what we were just talking about over here with things like, pen testing, those improvements also give your system more stability and performance over time. And of course, with stability and performance, that means we have better data and better decision making. So it can be a really big uplift to develop these programs for ConMon that continue throughout your journey with FedRAMP. But ultimately, the best way to sell this, if you need the people, the finances, the resources, whatever, is that this is an important part of just the overall organizational decision making and process to make good business decisions in the cloud. So what does that cost? Well, it really depends. We get this question a lot, and it's really heavily dependent on how much you want to do internally, how much you want to outsource, how much technology you want to use. There are plenty of GRC platforms out there that can help automate a lot of this work. But there are also plenty of companies that I've worked with before that have found, I'll say, more unique ways of maybe managing that process that better reflect how they do their work internally. We at Aquia and also at Emagine help lots of companies with their FedRAMP. This isn't a sales pitch, but that's what we're here for. That's what we do. So it's pretty common to have a third party come in and manage that ConMon process for you, so you don't have to figure out how to integrate that completely into your existing organization, because that can be a huge uplift. Again, this isn't a one-time thing. This is now part of how you operate, so you have to make sure that you're considering that. It also depends on the complexity and the size of your environment. One question we get a lot when people are starting on their FedRAMP journey is like, well, how much effort is it going to take? I don't know, man. Like, what's in scope, right? That's a big question. And the same thing can kind of happen with ConMon as well, right? So making sure that we're looking at this in a holistic way and understanding what's in scope, making sure we communicate that to people who are senior, who may be approving our budgets or helping us hire people, to really incorporate that into the overall plan of how we're managing that platform. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'll skip forward really quickly. So what are the best ways that I can recommend for making this easier? Of course, automate everything. I'll start down at the bottom. There are plenty of great tools, especially things native to AWS, that can help you automate a lot of these processes. Happy to talk about that with anyone after if they're interested. And then some of the tools that are built into AWS are really fantastic. So one that people don't mention a lot are the conformance packs. So AWS, for example, and I think Google also has it, if I'm allowed to say that, are these pre-built packs that can help you do compliance checks in your environment. And you can also talk to your AWS representative if you're working with them, and they have ones that can be specialized specifically for federal environments. So a lot of times, a lot of the things that we see customers trying to build out, we're like, someone's already done this, right? They've already done legwork and it's already in GovCloud. So let's utilize the work that's already there. Same things with tools like Audit Manager and AWS Config. There's a lot of functionality in there that can save you a lot of time and just automate a lot of this process to make it less people intensive, less hands-on, and just make it easier to report on as well. And then of course, the second one, this is the hardest one to justify, but you have to make this part of your culture. I keep saying that this will be how you operate from now on, but that's the truth, and it tends to get overlooked a lot. That I saw a study recently that said something like only 35% of organizational employees think security training is useful. But look at the number of breaches that are caused by, social engineering. It's huge, right? So there's a gap in making sure that it's not just our cloud team, it's not just the product team, it's not just InfoSec that understands why this is valuable, but communicating it to the entire organization and making them really understand that, like, yeah, I know clicking through the slides on this can be boring, but you really do have to understand it because people get taken advantage of all the time, right? And those attack vectors change all the time. So making sure that we make it a company-wide thing that everyone understands what it is and why it's important is really the key to success there. Let's see how much time. Perfect. All right. So we'll open it up to some questions here. Yes.
So for the red team exercises, you mentioned Emagine IT did a mapping to attack and like how Emagine is that public? Because I'd like to take a look at that.
Not yet. We just got the approval back from the PMO
Okay.
on it, but that's something we can definitely put out on a blog or something like that.
That'd be awesome.
So how do you think OMP is going to change ConMon, if they reinvent FedRAMP?
That's a great question.
Can you repeat the question for the people who are on the live stream?
Oh, sure. How will ConMon change with OMP's involvement? I would imagine it would probably become a little more prescriptive than it is right now. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with OMB getting more involved with all the different executive orders, right? Cybersecurity is not going to be just an afterthought. It's something that you place in or build into your infrastructure after the fact, right? It's going to be ingrained into the beginning, right? So with that in mind, I think that it will help continuous monitoring because we'll all be doing those things, making sure that the security training is done, making sure that your environment is secure and up to date, and following all the security practices that are required from the beginning. So we'll probably see a shift in overall uptick in better security posture for different systems. So I think it'll definitely help out. Yeah.
So with the proliferation of DevOps across most of these technologies and the addition of the supply chain control family, do you anticipate additional pen testing requirements around the supply chain in the future? It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of interrogation of how your developers are doing things, which is where a lot of these things get introduced.
I would think that that's probably going to happen, strictly because of the fact that, earlier, I can't remember those, I think it was last year that the executive order came out to where supply chain was going to be mandated, and FedRAMP was actually mentioned in that executive order. They just weren't automatically tied together, supply chain is a big factor in red teaming. So I would say that that DevOps and supply chain is going to be a huge factor in that, especially being that it's all cloud based. So that would be my guess. And to Allie's point, it would be better just to go ahead and start getting that in your culture baked in versus trying to play catch up.
And looking at that control family, it actually has a lot of overlap with just best practices from a legal standpoint. That's another area I'm really interested in is data security and things like that. So if you have a really good procurement process, you're probably doing a lot of it already. And a lot of the other things are tied to other control families. So what I'm seeing is that, there is an uplift involved with it, but it's not going to be as significant as I think a lot of people expected it to be, just because, if you have some sound practices in place now, you just kind of have to modify the paperwork a bit. Will that change in the next 5? Yeah, of course it will, but right now it doesn't seem like it's going to be too drastic.
And just to follow along with that as well, in the executive order, it does call out some more requirements to push security to your development environment as well. So there are things like, and I can't remember the exact EO number, but there are things like the reference of the SSDF for the Secure Software Development Framework, where you do need to, where CSP is providing to the government, you need to apply an attestation form if you do in-house development of things. And also, if you do have a 3PO assessment or a FedRAMP assessment, they do call that out. That's not something that we typically touch within our assessments, because more often than not, the development environment is out of scope unless you are processing some type of federal data. But just wanted to note that as well.
Yeah, that's a whole other really interesting topic about where the dev gets pulled in. So, yeah.
Hi, not a question, just a follow-up to the question that the gentleman asked here about how you expect ConMon to change going forward. So full disclosure, I don't speak on behalf of FedRAMP, but I did spend the last 5 years as a contractor working for PMO, researching the very issue of how ConMon's going to change. And I think you see in the draft a federal authorization memo, as well as in the RFP that's out right now, there's 2 ways that you can expect to see ConMon change going forward. You're going to see automated data collection centered around APIs, and you're going to see a common data standard on machinery-level compliance documentation, specifically OSCOUT. So those are the 2 things that I would expect to see in the future from ConMon as it changes.
Any idea when that's going to become formal?
That's a loaded question, man. They're always asking that. Still haven't gotten an answer, but if you read the draft on the memo, they say 18 months from the final approval of that memo. So that memo's been out for comment for a while, so no one knows when that clock's going to start or if that time period's going to change. But they are trying to put a timeline on it, which is good.
Awesome, thank you.
Bless them for trying.
Anyone else?
Hi, you said you were interested in protecting sensitive data. I'm just curious, sorry. We support a federal agency and they use many different types of clouds and systems and IS, PaaS, SaaS. How would you address this compliance and security culture when information flows so freely throughout all the different clouds and systems?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. Is it just US based? Yeah, well, that makes it easier, at least not saying EU. It's like 50-50, a really heavy training aspect of getting people to understand, how data classifications work and why it's important. A lot of that stuff can be done programmatically. So you might have some sort of system dependent on the data that's going back and forth that controls who has access and some sort of role-based access control for things like that. The place where people tend to get stuck is when you have information that flies around maybe in spreadsheets or in emails, and you have folks that don't work closely with the data, maybe HR or marketing, things like that, where they don't have that same understanding of why it's important to control that information. There are tools that you can buy that can help detect that stuff as it goes in and out of the system. But really, it's just making sure that people understand why it's critical to respect classification. It's not a great answer, but I mean, like that's the reality of it. Is if someone can find out a really good way to train people why security and privacy matters, most of us wouldn't be necessarily in this room. So.
That's definitely a good point, and something that Erik always says, and I'm stealing this from Erik, is that the weakest link is always going to be the people, right? So performing that security training, making sure that they understand your organization's mission and vision, and the mission critical assets that are inside the environment. It's definitely going to be hard for an organization that has multiple external vendors, multiple SaaS products, multiple teams in different locations to be able to control down to the actual data, everything that's going to be covering that system. But I guess something that FedRAMP does require is that you leverage other vendors that are also FedRAMP authorized. So you have some protection there, but it does come with that education and that training to the people.
I will say that one of our most successful social engineering campaigns that we did was prompting the users for an organization to opt out of security training by signing in. We sent it and said, if you feel that you need to opt out of security training for this quarter, go ahead and sign in and check the box. And we got so many credentials doing that, and everyone had to do security training.
Still getting the secrets.
Oh, 5 minutes, okay. Any other questions?
I just had one comment. Can y'all hear me?
Sure can.
One of the things that I'm an assessor, sorry, I can hear an echo in the background, I apologize. But I'm an assessor, and so I've been doing for.
Looks like we lost you there. You're breaking up a bit.
I was just going to say that we found that one of the big things that this year with Rev 5 transition, a big piece of this is especially for ConMons, is the implementation of compliance scans being mapped to controls has been like a huge jump in findings especially for those ConMon assessments.
Yeah, and I think that's something that goes back to, this is not a one-time thing, this is just how you operate now. That's something you do during the initial phases, right? And that's something you should maintain and just keep up to date, even if it's not exactly a requirement of ConMon that you keep those mappings up to date. And it's only going to help you, right? So, yeah, that's fantastic advice. Anyone else on the line have any questions or thoughts? All right, I guess we'll wrap it up. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your time. The operating folks will be in the breakout rooms. If anyone has any questions at any point during the day, you can come over and chat with us.